And I just became completely obsessed with it. That's all I thought about 24 hours a day. I mean, I was dreaming about it at night, constantly all day at work. That's all I thought about was killing kids.
On a desperate, sleepless night in his apartment, he lies unclothed on his bed as he scribbles in his diary. A whirlwind of horrific thoughts swirl in his mind. Lost in a lightless world of fantasy, he adds a header to a new page, "For Dead Experiments." Quote, "I bought a set of X-Acto knives and tweezers last night, giving me the necessary tools for my exploratory surgeries. Conscious or not," he adds, "his victims will be tied down and he will then decide whether or not to use sedation. Quote, would like to videotape the operations to use as future reference to show patients what I'll be doing or to terrify victims. But at this time, I don't think that I merely want to terrify them." Until he can afford a camcorder, he notes, he will use a tape recorder to capture their exact words and reactions. He revisits a sketch he had drafted earlier, a detailed medical diagram of the male reproductive system. After admiring his work for a moment, he returns to a page upon which he'd drawn up his plans for a torture rack, complete with a victim tied to it, that he intends to construct with wood and rope. Flowing to the next thought on the dark current of his stream of consciousness, quote, "For my first incident, a knife was the best choice. Decided that this next incident will have a cleaner kill, probably choking. I want a better location so I feel more comfortable and can take more time for various types of sex before and after killing. One possibility is kidnapping. At home, I'd have all the time I need. One thing for certain is, for this incident, the sex will take longer and death will be something different than stabbing." He pleasures himself to memories of past crimes committed throughout the night, returning always to his diary to lament the troubles caused for him by his sexual frustration and lack of outlet. He is resigned to these flights of fantasy as he is currently unable to hunt for fear of being recognized. Authorities had recently released a composite sketch in his likeness, and it had run on the news. While on this self-imposed lockdown, he studies local maps marking sites he considers to be opportune for kidnapping, assault, and murder. Nothing, however, provides him with any measure of satisfaction. For that, he will need to strike out once again and secure a victim. Unfortunately, he would find satisfaction before the month came to an end. Westley Allan Dodd was born on July 3, 1961, in Toppenish, Washington. He had two younger siblings that he innately believed were favored by his parents, causing resentment to grow in him. He felt abandoned, though his family members would strongly disagree, and failed to bond with his parents during his early childhood. From a very early age, he was abnormally focused on sexuality, which he first explored with his cousins and peers during innocent childhood play. What was likely fleeting curiosity for them awakened something primal in Dodd that set him firmly onto a deviant path from which he would never return. In his search for sexual excitement, he gravitated naturally to taboo acts. It began innocently enough with skinny dipping in the family pool, but very quickly evolved to bolder forms of exhibitionism and the pushing of boundaries with cousins and other age mates. When he received a bicycle for Christmas one year, it was, of course, not just a gift to him, but a tool that promised fresh outlets for his growing obsession. He spent hours riding around each day while identifying secluded areas where young children congregated to play without adult supervision. He would, on occasion, even expose himself to them. He soon discovered a debris-filled pond in town, and, nurturing his exhibitionistic impulses, began skinny dipping there. Having found his new secret thrill, he quickly upped the ante by creating a flotation device out of trash that he would lie nude on while floating around. He also enjoyed circling the pond on his bike wearing nothing but a BB gun holster around his waist. These acts, though exciting, would quickly lose their luster for Dodd, and in 1975, while home alone, he would take the next step in his exhibitionistic evolution. With his family home being located between two elementary schools, he noticed a steady procession of children passing by when school let out each day. He peered between the curtains of a window in his parents' room until he saw the young children, then parted the curtains and exposed himself. His heart raced like never before when he did it, and no one reported him, so he felt encouraged to continue. After a few weeks, however, a police officer finally showed up on the family doorstep. The officer spoke with his parents, but nothing would come of it in terms of legal action. Police presence frightened him, but not enough to curtail his behavior. Dodd had pushed the boundaries of decency and suffered no consequence, which had a profound effect on him in the worst possible way. He was laying a foundation made up of a false sense of power and the idea that he could operate secretly while fulfilling his evolving desires. He wasn't doing anything that required true intelligence, only a desire for deviance coupled with slight cunning. But he equated his acts with intelligence, deluding himself without having anyone close enough to him to check him with reality. Steering clear of any form of social assimilation, Dodd, with mild jokes and bullying from classmates on occasion, pulled even further away from his peers. Left to his own devices, he discovered in himself a strong fascination with both nudity and death at this formative stage in his life. The only thing that would hold his attention in school was his exposure to Nazi death camps in junior high. Watching a film strip about them in class one day, the content, nude men, women, and children waiting in lines for their turn to shower and eat, captivated him, and he would often visit the school library in order to see more. At age 14, with none of his current activities providing the spark he needed, Dodd tricked two of his young cousins into SAs at a family barbecue. Neither of them reported his actions, and he made a few more attempts, but when rebuffed, he backed off for fear of being caught. Around his 15th birthday, Dodd's parents divorced and his father attempted suicide. Unlike his siblings, he was unmoved by these pivotal moments in their lives. He had coexisted with his family since birth, but had somehow developed no love for them. Having become almost incapable of feeling empathy and being entirely self-focused, he had essentially become a psychopath. His social isolation had happened by design, and his focus was ever narrowing to what would be his lifelong obsession, the fulfillment of his deviant desires at any cost. Dodd's inevitable first arrest came when he was forced to admit to several counts of indecent exposure. As he had no criminal history and was cooperative throughout legal proceedings, the charges were dropped. 2 subsequent arrests occurred for the SAs of young children, requiring him to undergo therapy. Dodd, however, focused on his recent family trauma while downplaying his sexual transgressions. Ultimately, he was charged with only 1 of 7 criminal acts with minors, and that charge would also end up being dropped, with the lion's share of his actual SAs having gone unreported. Unaffected by this benign brush with the legal system, Dodd continued to expand his patterns of predatory behavior, stalking and SAing young boys at every opportunity. Numerous complaints were made to law enforcement, but no charges were laid against him, and so he proceeded brazenly, emboldened by a lack of punishment for what he knew were criminal acts. At age 19, Dodd joined the Navy, in large part to avoid having charges pressed against him for numerous SAs he'd committed against young boys. At first, he was able to satisfy his desires with fantasies of past and potential future victims. Very quickly, though, he returned to devious action. He SA'd one young boy in a bathroom and coaxed another into an SA by paying him. Not long after, he paid 2 more young boys to engage in similar acts. On this occasion, the elder boy alerted the police, and Dodd was forced to run. He was soon apprehended, which led to his discharge from the Navy. While living with his mother and working as a dishwasher, Dodd was soon arrested again for SAing a 5-year-old boy. This resulted in court-ordered counseling and enrollment in a mental health treatment program. Unsurprisingly, he would spend a month in jail for failing to meet the conditions of that plan. Upon his release, he moved to Lewiston, where he befriended a 9-year-old boy and his single mother. He babysat the boy on weekends, and though he would later claim not to have wanted to SA him, he eventually, quote, talked himself into doing so while the boy slept. He was caught and again arrested, charged with lewd conduct. Finally given a prison sentence of 10 years, Dodd would end up serving only 4 months in county jail. He was ordered by the court to continue treatment upon his release and would see a counselor for the following 2 years, making no adjustments to his behavior all the while. In 1986, now 25, Dodd was living with a married couple and their 4-year-old son named Richie. Predictably, Dodd began essaying the boy right away and continued to do so several times a week for 5 months. Richie then began attempting, to the best of his ability, to convey to his parents what was happening to him, so Dodd decided to leave before being exposed and reported to the police. He claimed to have become attached to the boy, deluding himself into believing that his relationship with Richie was something meaningful, which left him feeling very lonely. The kind of love he needed and was able to accept could apparently only come from a child, though it was somehow lost on him that his means of relating to children negated the possibility of love in any form. He then moved in with his sister and her boyfriend Ralph, who had a 2-year-old son named Sammy. Unsurprisingly, Sammy became Dodd's next companion and, quote, soulmate. In reality, he was not attached to the boy, but to the idea of having a live-in victim that could not escape him. Everything, aside from the essays that transpired between them, took place in Dodd's mind. It's pure madness to entertain the idea that he and Sammy were anything more in terms of a relationship than the assaulter and the assaulted. The words Dodd later used when describing the situation, closeness, companionship, are both absurd and upsetting. He was, in fact, an opportunistic predator taking advantage of what was available to him given his living situations. Evolving into something even more repulsive than he'd been, Dodd decided that he would no longer abide resistance from his victims. He would then SA Sammy, a 2-year-old, using physical force, which he'd not done before. During that struggle, he said, I experienced the strongest climax I'd ever had. The struggle was very stimulating and so powerful that it was all I could think of. On the negative side, he said, as though all of this wasn't taking place on the negative side, quote, I realized that, during the assault, I had become completely oblivious to my surroundings, something that could get me caught in the future. But all was well, and I learned from the experience in the safety of my own home. Eventually, on his own again, Dodd quickly became forlorn without a ready-made victim at his disposal. Now singularly focused on hunting victims, he mapped out his entire neighborhood, prepared a murder kit, and began planning for all attack scenarios and all means of evading detection. He rehearsed everything in his mind, over and over. Imagine, as that's all we can do, the level of mental illness required for this kind of all-consuming effort in the service of something so evil. Dodd began frequenting schoolyards and playgrounds where he watched children and studied their behavior. He would approach them and employ a scheme of some kind, like that he was looking for a young boy and needed their help finding him. At the first sign of suspicion, however, he would abandon his plan. It was all a game to him, and he deluded himself into believing that he was playing it intelligently. On one occasion, utilizing the lost child ruse, Dodd lured a 6-year-old boy away from his playmates near a construction site. As he attempted to convince the boy to bring a friend along with them, 2 construction workers arrived, causing Dodd to flee. The boy told his parents what had happened, and when authorities got involved, the construction workers were able to identify Dodd. He was charged with unlawful detainment and served 118 days in county jail. He was then given 1 year of probation with required counseling and was prohibited from having any contact with children. Upon his release, Dodd moved to an apartment in Renton, Washington, and by a stroke of incredible misfortune, Ralph and Sammy, now nearly 3 years old, came to live with him again. Dodd was working at a local convenience store and regularly prepared meals for Ralph and Sammy, who'd been living quite rough for a time. As Dodd put it, quote, us 3 bachelors were doing good. What he means is that he was happy to have his live-in victim back. He would babysit Sammy, play with him, and take him on outings, all while continuing to SA the boy daily. He was accustoming Sammy to his own disgusting desires and he was doing so without sympathy. The child, forced to live with him and unable to defend or speak for himself, would learn his role as his victim, Dodd would later say. His delusion reached such a level that he actually came to think of a 3-year-old as his willing sexual partner whom he, quote, made love to. Dodd said, quote, I believed that his own sexual feelings would awaken. By the time he was 10, he'd be an absolutely perfect lover for me. He'd learn how to please me rather than just lay motionless. I would train my lover right. Oof. Eventually forced to move out when it was discovered that he was violating the terms of his probation, Dodd's fantasies of assault revisited him so overwhelmingly that he created an altar to Satan with Sammy's photo on it. He prayed to it for another boy like Sammy that he could keep. In May of 1988, Dodd learned that Ralph was once more in need of a place to stay. He offered his apartment to he and Sammy and immediately began essaying the boy again. Fortunately, Ralph's ex-wife would soon come to take Sammy away. Ralph's former girlfriend then came to stay with them. She had a daughter named Cassie who was about Dodd's age. He and Cassie began spending time together, and though he didn't feel a strong attraction to her, he explored the novelty of having a girlfriend. Cassie was the aggressor, and had she not been, nothing would ever have transpired between them. But with Dodd choosing to go along with things, they eventually became intimate. And here we have the era of potential change that Dodd would later place so much value on when telling his story. He claimed during the honeymoon phase of the relationship that his desire to SA children was, quote, all but completely gone. He tossed his pedophilic photos in the trash, but would readily be able to retrieve them if need be, as he had not destroyed them, of course. However, he did attempt to SA Cassie's 2 children in some distorted form of a last hurrah before settling down, but circumstances fortunately kept him from doing so. About a month into the relationship, Cassie disappeared, returning the following day with a moving van. She was leaving and she was not providing Dodd with an explanation for her departure. Obviously, his very first thought after being hurt by Cassie was the assault of children. He moved into a house with Ralph and Ralph's ex-girlfriend Ruth. Unfortunately, once more, Sammy was brought back to live with them. Attempting to pick things up where he'd left off with his lover, Dodd found that his relationship with Sammy was not satisfying his ever-growing need for control. He now wanted a child to possess. In the meantime, though, he continued to SA Sammy until Ralph left when given the opportunity to live in a larger home. Alone once again, Dodd found himself unhindered by loneliness this time, as he had been yearning for the freedom to find new victims. He promptly selected a park near his home where he watched children play and fantasized about kidnapping and SAing them. His plans, once again in motion, were soon interrupted when Cassie returned after having been gone for a year with her current boyfriend and a 4-month-old baby named Bobby. Dodd, for some reason, allowed them to move in with him. The boyfriend left within a week, and Cassie then professed to Dodd that she wanted to be with him and that the child was actually his. He later claimed to have been happy about the chance to have a family. As a side note, Cassie and her mother, who would also be moving in with them, practiced witchcraft, and both of them, Dodd believed, were prostitutes, so this was likely not going to end well. Cassie and her mother soon decided to move to Yakima, Washington, and Dodd agreed to quit his job and accompany them. While there, of course, Cassie left him again and told him that he would never again see his son, whose existence he'd just barely become accustomed to. Although it's very possible that the child was not his, Dodd had at least gotten a whiff of a shot at pursuing a normal life, and even taken some tepid steps in that direction. Unfortunately, though, he'd chosen, or been chosen by, a very unsuitable woman to set down roots with. She left him almost immediately after he uprooted his life for her, soon returning and taking Bobby away, tearing those fledgling roots from the ground before they'd even begun to grow. Dead set on finding and keeping young victims for himself, Dodd stepped up his relationship with Satan, drafting an actual contract for the fulfillment of his desires. Quote, I've now asked Satan to provide me with a 6 to 10-year-old boy. He laid out a very specific and insanely disturbing set of stipulations. Quote, If the conditions are met and I can remain sexually satisfied, then I will gladly turn my soul over to Satan. Girlfriend or no girlfriend, a father or not, Dodd's true desires were a sleeping giant in him that would eventually awaken. He felt a perverse sense of justification in reverting to the plan he'd been working toward all his life. But now, added to his agenda, was murder. Quote, "The more I thought about it, the more exciting the idea of murder sounded. I planned many ways to kill a boy. Then I started thinking of torture, castration, and even cannibalism." With a new job and a new apartment, Dodd eagerly selected his next hunting ground, nearby David Douglas Park, which he called an ideal place for SAing and killing children. As was his MO, he drew a detailed diagram of the grounds and spent days there lurking. He returned to his apartment each day and wrote about missed opportunities and thwarted strikes in order to avoid similar pitfalls on future outings. In his writings, he referred to children he'd encountered at the park as possibles. Quote, "If I can get it home," he wrote, "I'll have more time for various types of rape rather than just one quickie before the murder." The "it" he was referring to, of course, was a child, a mere object to him. The absurdity of what he was doing is mind-blowing. He prepared as though going to war, having now conformed his entire lifestyle to the hunt for children. On September 4th, 1989, Labor Day, Dodd resolves that he will not end the day without acquiring a victim. He sets out with a packed lunch and stalks the grounds of the park. Though encountering a few possibles, he is prevented from striking in each instance. Running out of time, he is now desperate. At about 6:15 p.m., he spots two boys on bicycles cutting through the park. As they turn onto the trail he's walking on, he notes that they are both nearing the upper end of the age range he finds attractive, but with options being limited, he proceeds with his premeditated plan. Abandoning his usual schemes and employing a much sterner approach, he stands in the middle of the narrow trail so that the boys will have to stop momentarily. When they do, he says, quote, "I want you two to come with me." When they ask why, he replies authoritatively that it's because he's telling them to. Cautiously, the boys follow him up the trail. He asks them their names and ages. They are Cole Neer, 11, and Billy Neer, 10. Dodd veers off of the trail and tells them to leave their bikes in some nearby bushes. Although uneasy, they continue to follow, up a slight hill and into an area concealed by bushes and a large tree. Dodd then tells them that they're going to play a game and has the boys sit on the ground back to back. Cole asks what the game is, but Dodd ignores him as he proceeds to tie their hands together with a shoelace. He kneels in front of the boys and says that one of them has to let him pull their pants down. Billy hesitantly volunteers his older brother Cole as he begins to whimper and struggle against his bonds. Cole asks why he's doing this to them, and Dodd replies truthfully, "Because I have to do it." He claims that he will let them go shortly, though he is well aware that neither of them will be leaving the park. When Dodd has finished his assaults, he says calmly, "There's just one more thing," and pulls a knife from a sheath tucked into his sock. The boys begin to cry and plead with him. Billy says that he won't tell anyone about what's happened, just as Dodd lurches forward and plunges the knife deep into his stomach. He turns to Cole and attempts to do the same to him, but the knife cuts into the boy's side as he contorts to avoid the blade. Cole falls to the ground, writhing in pain. Dodd then sees Billy, clutching his stomach, desperately running toward a road that passes by the park. He drops down and attempts to finish Cole off, violently slicing at his arms and legs before ultimately stabbing him twice more, in the stomach and the chest. He then runs and grabs hold of Billy not far from the road. Billy cries out twice, saying that he is sorry. Dodd stabs him in the shoulder, then again in the lower right side of his abdomen before fleeing. He slows his pace when he reaches the bike trail so as not to rouse suspicion in anyone he might encounter. He then decides to return to the scene in order to ensure that he'd not left anything behind. There he sees Cole, covered in blood, lying on his back with his eyes open. He does not appear to be breathing. Dodd glances around, sees no potential evidence in the area, and flees the scene once again, deciding not to check on Billy near the road for fear of being spotted with the body. As he is trained to do in such situations, Dodd calms himself as he makes his exit through the park. With his bloodied hands in his pockets, he greets an old man who walks by and throws an errant baseball back to some people playing nearby before arriving at his car. He drives by the park on the road Billy had been running toward and sees a young man hurrying away from the area. Assuming that the young man must have discovered Billy's body, Dodd rushes back to his apartment. The young man Dodd had seen running from the scene had, in fact, discovered Billy's body. Once at a nearby convenience store, he reported that he had seen a hit-and-run accident. When police and paramedics arrived, they quickly confirmed that the boy had not been the victim of a hit-and-run, but of a homicidal attack. Barely alive, he was rushed into a helicopter bound for the hospital. Tragically, he would die on the way there, having been found just moments too late. With no identification on him, he was pronounced dead on arrival and listed on record as Junior Doe. Detectives realized, upon receiving the report of the missing Neer brothers, that there may be another body to locate. They needed to determine whether Junior Doe was one of the missing brothers, and so a team was rounded up to search the grounds of David Douglas Park. Lanterns and flashlights flickered about into the night as they worked their way through the park's secluded areas. Eventually, they came upon 2 BMX bicycles lying in the bushes about 50 yards off of a trail. At about 2 a.m., another young boy's body was found resting in heavy brush. Utilizing photos provided by the father of the Neer brothers, authorities positively identified the body as Cole Neer. It was only then that Billy Neer regained his identity. All of this, the frenzied and deeply disturbing aftermath of the crimes, happens completely outside the realm of concern of Westley Allan Dodd. He listened to the news on the day of the murders and felt an incredible sense of relief when it was reported that Billy had died. He hid in his apartment over the following days, though he still reported for work, where he disposed of the murder weapon in a dumpster. The memory of Billy saying he was sorry before Dodd took his life did stick in his mind, and it did bother him. Not enough, however, to keep him from reading newspaper articles in order to relive the murders in fantasy before clipping and adding them to a file he kept. Admitting to himself that he got more of a rush from killing than he did from assaulting, Dodd devised a plan for the following day, a Friday. He would find his next victim on his way home from work, which would maximize the time he'd get with him before having to return to work on Monday. This time, he planned to target a much younger victim, to begin his medical experiments, to photograph the corpse, and to perform necrophilia. Though visiting a local amusement park and a movie theater in his deviant pursuit that night, his plan was a failure. Miserable, he returned home, forced to delay his plan another day. Early the next morning, Dodd purchased film for his Polaroid camera, then heads to the Richmond School playground in Portland. He is excited by the sight of children playing as he pulls up and parks his car. He gets out and leans against the telephone pole as he surveys his chosen hunting ground. 2 boys between 8 and 9 toss a football at the far end of the park, while a younger boy, perhaps 4 or 5, plays alone on a concrete mound-like structure with a slide on one side. After watching the younger boy for a few minutes, Dodd approaches and asks him if he'd like to have some fun and make some money. The boy shakes his head no, but doesn't appear to be frightened by Dodd's presence. He urges the boy, holding out his hand and repeating that it will be fun. The boy takes his hand and they walk together to the parking area, where they are then out of the view of anyone else. The boy is reticent, but Dodd picks him up, places him into his car, and drives away. He tells the child that they're going to his place to play some games. He then asks his name, to which the boy replies Lee, holding up 4 fingers before adding that he's 4 years old. Lee soon begins to cry, fearing that his brother, who had been at the park, will miss him while he's gone. Dodd grabs hold of Lee's hand and assures him that it will be okay, in order to keep him from causing a scene as they drive down busy suburban streets. When they arrive at Dodd's apartment, he picks the boy up to carry him inside. Lee, however, says that he can walk and follows Dodd inside. Dodd sits Lee down on his bed and snaps a picture of him with his Polaroid camera. He then retrieves a briefcase from under the bed and begins showing the boy lewd photographs of children. Lee is obviously uninterested, so Dodd tucks the photo album away and instructs him to remove his clothing. Lee does not react, so Dodd repeats himself while taking one of the boy's shoes off. After coaxing him to undress, he has Lee lie back on his bed and ties his wrists and ankles with rope. He snaps another photo and removes the restraints before proceeding to SA the young boy. After allowing Lee to get dressed, they watch cartoons together. Dodd asks him if he'd like to spend the night there. Lee says no, indicating again that his brother will miss him. Dodd reassures him that his brother is having fun too and attempts to entice Lee with an offer. They can go to Kmart for a new toy, then stop at McDonald's for dinner, if he agrees to spend the night with him. Excitedly, the boy agrees. While at Kmart, Lee begins to cry and insists that he wants to go home. As Dodd tries to calm him, a store employee notices the commotion. Dodd says that he's watching his sister's child, that he's cranky and wants to go home, but that they have to finish shopping first. With the employee seemingly placated, Dodd quickly grabs a RoboCop toy, pays for it, and ushers Lee back to the car. The toy preoccupies Lee and they proceed to McDonald's, where they eat, and Dodd then watches him play in the McDonald's play place outside. Back at the apartment, Lee plays with his new toy as Dodd writes in his diary. Quote, "He suspects nothing now. We'll probably wait until morning to kill him. That way his body will still be fairly fresh for experiments after work. I'll suffocate him in his sleep when I wake up for work, if I sleep." Unquote. Lee falls asleep at around 9:45. Dodd then SAs him again while watching the TV for news reports of his abduction. Too excited by the idea of finally having a victim in his apartment to do with as he pleased, Dodd would not sleep that night. He continues to SA Lee for hours, mostly while he sleeps. At around 2 a.m., he pulls Lee on top of him and lays with him as though the child is his willing lover. Lee wakes up at around 3:15 and Dodd says, quote, "I'm going to kill you in the morning." Lee, of course, begins to cry. Worried only about the noise the child is making, Dodd assures him that he isn't really going to kill him, and Lee eventually falls back to sleep. At 5:30 a.m., Dodd places a pillow on Lee and lays across it, trapping him in place. He then begins choking him with one hand, using the other to further restrain the child. As Lee awakens and begins to struggle, Dodd is forced to choke him with both hands. Lee stops moving after about 15 seconds, but begins to stir a moment later. Dodd repeats the process, and Lee soon snaps back to consciousness again. Finally, with his weak little hands fatigued, Dodd grabs a rope that he keeps by his bedside and wraps it around Lee's neck. He watches closely for a moment, enjoying the boy's struggle to live, before picking him up and walking him over to the closet. Dodd slides some clothing aside, ties the rope to the clothes rod, and leaves Lee there to die. He then unhurriedly straightens up the room before grabbing his camera to snap a final photo of his victim. After about 10 minutes, Dodd cuts the rope and lays Lee on the bed. He attempts to SA the body, but is unable to do so. He places Lee's corpse on the shelf in his closet and covers him with pillows and blankets. Dodd then takes his time, readying for work, and leaves. He would later admit to SAing the corpse when he returned home that night. Dodd reads about Lee's disappearance in the newspaper, then begins writing in his diary. 4:50 p.m. We'll now take a leak and take the naked body of 4-year-old Lee Joseph Isley out of the closet. The paper article was on page 5 of section B, like it was no major deal he's missing. Looks like a perfect kidnapping. 5:05 p.m. Now getting Lee out of the closet. Oh yeah, I knew for sure this morning he was dead. I'd heard of muscles relaxing and it's normal to go potty after dying. He peed on me twice as I hid his body and once more on the shelf in the closet. 5:10 p.m. He is rather gross looking, cold, stiff, and purple. 5:16 p.m. See photos 8 and 9. These photos show the position he's stuck in from being in the small closet area. 5:35 p.m. I'm going to go get some garbage bags now to put his bundled up body into. Then I'll figure out a place to dump the garbage. I'll wear gloves when handling the bags, no chance of fingerprints if someone discovers contents of the bag. 6:50 p.m. Now wearing gloves to handle trash bags to put Lee in. Washed his underwear in shower, will now go dump his naked body. 8 p.m. Home. Dumped at 7:35 p.m. on 10/30/89. On November 1st, a pheasant hunter and his dog out in the Washington State Game Preserve are on their way back to his vehicle when the dog begins moving toward a white object protruding unnaturally from the brush. As the hunter approaches, his dog is already sniffing at what he then realizes is the lifeless, decomposing body of a young boy. Horrified, he runs to report what he'd found, and deputies from the Clark County Sheriff's Department soon arrive. The hunter remarks, quote, "It's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life," as deputies gaze upon the small nude body lying in a bushy area, having been posed suggestively and hastily covered with debris. The body is soon identified as the missing boy from Portland. Lee's father would learn of his son's death not from the police, but from newspaper reporters seeking his reaction for their stories. While all of this transpires, Dodd burns Lee's clothing in a barrel behind his apartment, keeping only his underwear as a twisted souvenir. While authorities investigate the murders of the Neer brothers and Lee Isley, Dodd is already deep into the planning of his next offense. Convinced that he had committed and gotten away with the perfect crime, he now believes that he can get away with anything if he adheres to his plans. He would later say, quote, "There was nothing left to prevent me from carrying out even the worst of my death fantasies." He even considered toying with the police after his next victim, writing on his body, quote, "Billy and Cole were number 1 and 2. Lee was number 3. Here is number 4. Who and where is number 5? Needing, as always, to up the ante, he purchases materials from a hardware store and sets about building his planned torture rack. He pleasures himself over and over to the thought of his next victim being stretched out helpless as he tortures him. Driven by his depraved fantasies, he writes, referring to the tragic deaths of his victims as incidents, quote, "Incident 3 will die maybe this way. He'll be tied down as Lee was in Incident 2. Instead of placing a bag over his head, as I had previously planned, I'll tape his mouth shut with duct tape. Then, when ready, I'll use something to plug his nose. That way I can sit back, take pictures, and watch him die instead of concentrating on using my hands or the rope around his neck. That would eliminate the rope burns on his neck as Lee had in Incident 2. This is also better than the plastic bag, as I can clearly see his face and eyes as he dies, as well as get some pictures of a naked and dying boy." Dodd attempts 2 abductions in nearby movie theaters over the following days, but is unsuccessful on both occasions. Quote, "I now ask Satan to guide me and help me obtain a boy tonight. This one I'd like to keep a while, keeping him awake each night so he'll sleep all day while I'm at work, tied and mouth taped shut to be on the safe side. I'll give him a haircut and buy a new set of clothes for him to change his appearance in case I take him out as I did Lee in number 2. I might even get 2 boys. In the case of 2, the older, or both, would decide, when I tire of them, which was to die. I also want to do my medical experiments this time, once finished with sexual play on the body or bodies." After writing this entry, Dodd sets out for the New Liberty Theater. He attends a showing of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and watches his potential victims from the back row. A small boy of about 6 leaves the theater and Dodd follows seconds later. He stops the boy as he exits a bathroom stall and says he's going to take him outside, adding that he is not going to hurt him. The boy says that he has to get back to his waiting mother. Dodd then becomes more insistent, telling the boy to follow him outside. Without awaiting a response, he picks the boy up and flings him over his shoulder. The boy begins screaming, so Dodd punches him in the chest with his free hand, hoping to knock the wind out of him. As he exits the bathroom with his victim, Dodd is met by a theater employee. Putting on a show as planned, he tells the struggling boy to calm down, calling him son as he heads for the front door of the theater. The boy continues to scream, asking for help, and finally saying that he doesn't know the man, just as Dodd makes it outside. An employee calls 911 as a couple more take off in pursuit of Dodd. They see him disappearing with the boy around the side of a building. They follow, and luckily, the boy comes running toward them as they round the corner. An employee carries the boy back into the theater where they locate his mother and her boyfriend, William Graves. When told what's happened, Graves takes off in search of the would-be kidnapper. A theater employee points him in the direction of the man who'd gotten into a yellow Pinto station wagon. Graves hops into his car and speeds off. He quickly catches up to the vehicle, which appears to be wobbling as though something is wrong with it. The Pinto stalls just as he pulls up beside it. Graves gets out and approaches, inconspicuously remarking to the driver that it looks like he's having trouble and asking if he'd like some help. Dodd nods his head, and Graves suggests that they push the car into a nearby parking lot so that he can take a look at it. When they get the car into the lot, Dodd pops the hood. Graves quickly wraps an arm around his neck and uses his other hand to pin Dodd's arm behind his back. He tells Dodd that they're going to the cops. Feigning shock, Dodd asks what he's done. Graves then asks him to explain why he'd taken the boy from the theater, and Dodd goes silent. Graves obviously wants to hurt him in this moment, but instead marches the criminal back to the theater and pins him against a wall there. He takes his belt off and wraps it around Dodd's wrists. Police arrive shortly thereafter and arrest him. At the police station, Dodd is cooperative as he is processed and officially charged with kidnapping. Detectives find that his prior arrests include charges of kidnapping, indecent liberties, and lewd and lascivious conduct with a minor. They also note the proximity of his address to the locations of both the game preserve where Lee Isley's body had been found and David Douglas Park, where the Neer brothers had been killed on Labor Day. When Dodd is interrogated, he openly discusses the incident at the theater, his motive, his serious problem with sexual deviancy, and eventually the possibility of him continuing to harm children. When questioned about the recent murders of the Neer brothers and Lee Isley, Dodd denies any involvement at first, but he soon breaks without too much pressing and confesses to having committed the murders. He does so in a cryptic way, however, telling the detectives that they will find a key on his keychain that opens a briefcase under his bed. In that briefcase, they will find all the evidence they are looking for. In Dodd's apartment, officers find restraints attached to his bed, drawers filled with belts and ropes, X-Acto knives and metal instruments, his wooden torture rack, and suspicious stains on a shelf in the closet. Finally, they locate the briefcase under his bed. When detectives later gather to open it, they find a small, neatly folded pair of Ghostbusters underwear, several manila envelopes containing handwritten documents labeled as Incident 1, Incident 2, and Incident 3, newspaper clippings about all three murders, as well as Dodd's diary. The diary sickened the detectives who were forced to review its contents. They knew that it existed in order for Dodd to relive the experiences of his assaults and murders over and over again. It was something that had no place on this earth, and yet it existed. Adding insult to injury for the detectives was the existence of Dodd's pink photo album labeled Family Memories, which included nude photos of Lee Isley, Dodd engaging in SA before and after Lee's death, and Lee's body hanging in the closet. Dodd is charged with 3 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, 1 count of first-degree attempted kidnapping, and 1 count of attempted murder. The state makes it very clear from the outset that they will be seeking the death penalty. News reports and articles about the captured child killer go out nationwide, and people are finally exposed to the repulsive tangle that is the life of Westley Allan Dodd. Though initially pleading not guilty in spite of his confession, Dodd claims to welcome the death penalty, and writes the prosecutor's office in an attempt to change his plea to guilty on all counts. He also claims during this period to feel sorry for all of the children he had victimized. He cries in his jail cell, reports that he's contemplated suicide, and repeatedly calls for a death sentence to be issued and carried out. What was actually happening was that his reason for living had been taken from him, leaving him with no fulfillable purpose. If he could not hunt, assault, and kill children, then he may as well be dead. While still alive, though, he continued on his quest for good, even creating a pamphlet to warn children about people like himself, and providing instructions that could keep them from becoming victims. He mailed it to a newspaper in Vancouver, and it was published as, quote, "When You Meet a Stranger" by Westley Allan Dodd. He told children to say no, resist, and run, as he was never able to harm those who had. He chose to include details of his past crimes as part of his instruction, however, making the true intent of his writing quite dubious. Many were outraged by the pamphlet, but Dodd claimed to have written it in all sincerity. At his trial in June of 1990, which took place only to determine whether Dodd would spend the rest of his life in prison or die for his crimes, jurors were horrified as his diary entries were read aloud. The prosecution pointed out that Dodd, planning to engage in many long-term kidnappings and murders of young children, showed a desire to torture, experiment on, and dismember them while still alive. One of the diary entries read before the court revealed that he had actually begun conducting these experiments with Lee Isley before killing him, which had not been part of his confession. According to the state, there was no evidence to consider that warranted compassion or forgiveness. Dodd planned child murders, carried them out, then fantasized and wrote about them. A sentence of life in prison would still allow him to experience two of those things, and they wished to forever deny him those disturbing and disgusting experiences. Dodd made a statement in court, quote, "I don't want to make any excuses. It doesn't really matter why the crimes happened. I should be punished to the full extent of the law, as should all sex offenders and murderers. I can accept a death sentence, and I don't want to see any delays in carrying it out. If my death will bring peace to the people I've hurt, then it's time for me to die," unquote. The jury expressed their agreement when, on July 15, 1990, they decided that Westley Allan Dodd would die for his crimes. The judge said to him after the verdict was read, quote, "You have an ongoing, depraved, sadistic desire to hurt, injure, and maim others. To you, it is clear that murder is the ultimate goal, the ultimate satisfaction. I am able to sign your death decree without looking back," unquote. The gallows at Washington State had not been used since 1963. Prison staff painted the walls, replaced the mechanism that opened the trapdoor in the floor, and washed the windows through which spectators would view the execution. On the night of January 4, 1993, 12 people were brought in to witness Dodd's death. Among them were Lee Isley's mother and Cole and Billy Neer's father. Just after midnight, Dodd was ushered in. Asked if he had any last words, he said, quote, "I was once asked by somebody if there was any way sex offenders could be stopped. I said no. I was wrong. I was wrong when I said that there was no hope, no peace. There is hope, there is peace. I found both in the Lord Jesus Christ. Look to the Lord and you will find peace," unquote. A screen then dropped down to conceal the identities of the executioners. Dodd took his place over the trapdoor, a black hood was placed over his head, and the noose was placed around his neck. A signal was given, and the trapdoor snapped open beneath him with a bang. Dodd dropped 7 feet 1 inch instantaneously. His body swung somewhat, and slight movement could be seen in his stomach and hands. His legs bent for a moment but went limp seconds later. He was officially pronounced dead at 12:09 a.m. on January 5, 1993. It appeared as though he had died quickly. The truth, however, was that the length of rope had been miscalculated. Dodd's neck had not snapped as intended. Rather, his tendons, ligaments, and nerves had torn, causing him to pass out. He then slowly strangled to death. Westley Allan Dodd, having chosen to remain emotionally distant from everyone in his life, left himself with the rush that resulted from deviant behavior as his sole driving purpose. From a young age, fantasies easily gripped his otherwise unoccupied mind and escalated unfettered by intervention, ultimately spinning out of control and pulling others into its destructive field. Every decision in his life was made based on the need to satisfy his urges. Even the jobs he held were ones that enabled him to identify and stalk victims while on the clock. His behaviors were compulsive and ever escalating, revealing a psychology dominated by distorted sexual urges, a strong capacity for manipulation, and the complete absence of empathy. His crimes were not the result of a point of madness being reached, but of a lifetime of disgusting impulses that he never sought to control. Many people, including family, psychiatric professionals, and police, were aware of his long history of assaults against children, yet the leniency of the strictures placed upon him allowed him to continue his wicked ways. Dodd actually, at one point, considered tracking his son Bobby down and kidnapping him. It would not be to care for him, however, but to seat him at his right hand while fulfilling the role of God himself. He would extol the virtues of his son to his sex slaves, and they would eventually become jealous and angry enough to kill Bobby. Dodd would tell them that someone had to die and that only the death of his son would save their lives. He wanted to mock what God had done in the Bible by sacrificing his son. If he allowed his victims to kill Bobby, then they would have to submit to his every desire. In his own words, he wanted to be treated as a god, having his power over his victims respected at all times. They would have to worship him in order to stay alive. His willingness and ability to kill, he believed, would give him absolute control. What makes the life of Westley Allan Dodd so haunting is not just the disturbing brutality of his crimes and the innocence and helplessness of his chosen victims, but the fact that he knew, given the ceaseless intensity of his deviant desires, that he could never have been rehabilitated. He fully recognized the evil he was committing, and he chose it regardless of anything else. When the objects of his desire were placed beyond his reach, he welcomed death, and his final act of malevolence was to fight to quickly bring about his own annihilation. Thank you for listening.
I am what a child molester looks like. There is no dirty old man. Dirty old man does not exist. I am what a child molester looks like. I am what a serial killer looks like. I don't know if I have any feelings. I don't think any, maybe that's my birth defect. I wasn't even born with feelings. I don't know. Because I've never felt anything about anything.